Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2, joining me today is...
Steve Baxi.
And Dead or Alive, you're coming with us, because this is a review of RoboCop. Now I should preface this, there is another review of RoboCop on this channel. It was from like one of the first probably 10 episodes of Geeky Gentlemen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's okay, it's okay. I am never opposed to redoing a review of a movie because my opinions have changed. Again, that review came out over 10 years ago now. Something tells me my opinions may have changed. I didn't go back and watch it though, and I don't think I have the heart to at this point. But I do very clearly remember one opinion that has not changed, and that is the fucking theme song for RoboCop goes so goddamn hard. Fucking love RoboCop's theme song, man. It's ridiculously cool.
It's so like immediately iconic, yeah.
Yeah.
That and the Dead or Alive, You're Coming With Me is some of the coolest shit ever.
Yeah, but I don't know, it just goes it's so fucking cool. I dig the shit out of it. So Steve, what made you want to talk about RoboCop?
So recently, all the RoboCop movies ended up on HBO. So I haven't actually seen this movie in probably since 2013 or 2014. So it's been a really, really long time.
You decided once when the remake came out, you needed to go watch the original, and then you decided not to watch the remake?
Well, I watched both when the remake came out. So I watched the original for the first time all the way back when Netflix was still sending you single DVDs. And so, like, I'd watch the first one, return it, get the second one, return it, get the third one, and just kind of chucked through that and the Planet of the Apes movies and a lot of the stuff that way. But then I hadn't seen it since the remake came out, and then I hadn't touched this movie since. So I just figured, it's on HBO, might as well revisit RoboCop every 10 years and see how much closer we are getting to this dystopian future. And, I was surprised, because going back and watching this, I thought I was going to like it. Because I like Paul Verhoeven movies. I know a lot of the stuff about the history behind this movie, and there's a lot of cool, interesting facts about, like, why they decided to do certain things or certain thematic stuff that's in the script that might not come through in the movie and stuff like that. But I was surprised at just how much I liked it going back and watching it again. Like, there's a case to be made that this is, like, one of the greatest movies of the 80s. It's so fucking good. I love it.
I mean, it's just so great because it's like, it's of that era where action movies were like made for adults but marketed to children. And it's just got such like wild ideas in it. I was watching it with Haley, and it gets to that scene where it like breaks into the surveillance station and goes to the computer, and I'm like, right, this is my favorite thing about this movie. And she goes, what? And he just, like, fucking sticks the goddamn knife out of his hand and then stabs it into the computer. And I'm like, the USB drive is a fucking shiv. I love it so much.
I love how everything is equipped for it, too. He just pulls that shit out and stabs a random TV screen at the end.
No, it's just the future where the USB drive, instead of being a pussy-ass rectangle that never works when you insert it in, is a fucking shiv.
Honestly, that's maybe one area where we probably could stand to be more like RoboCop in the future, because that's so good.
Listen, I will tell you right now, I would accept everything, including the gas-guzzling car, the Sucks 6000 that gets 8 miles to the gallon, if I got USB drives that were also shivs.
Yeah, I mean, so this movie is fascinating for a lot of levels. It's a really good action movie. It's a really good satire. It's got so much like thematic and character stuff going on just beneath the surface, and I find it really fascinating to talk about because if you put this movie in anyone else's hands in the 80s and you were just doing it in that spew of Star Wars sequels and Terminator and Blade Runner like that, all the heyday of sci-fi movies that were coming out in the 80s, fucking E.T., like all of the stuff that was coming out for all different audiences, and you put this script in the hands of just anybody, you would have just gotten like a generic he's a cop but he's a robot movie. You would have gotten the TJ Laser cartoon that his kid watches, that except the movie where it's just a cool guy who twirls a gun and he's just a robot cop. But you give it to Paul Verhoeven, you give it to these two writers who are extremely politically aware, who hate Reaganomics, and it turns into this dumb action movie that the more you think about it, the more layers and layers and layers and layers it has, and I just kind of love that experience. So I wanted to talk about it with you, especially because I felt like some of the stuff that happens here, like the newscasters talking or the intermittent commercials about like the family playing the nuke game would just be really fun to dissect a little bit.
It's so weird to me that this movie is this movie and has all of that going on, and yet it's the second film that's written by Frank Miller.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a story behind that, yeah.
What? Oh, there is?
Yeah. So, there's a couple of things in this movie that some people have sort of wrongly attributed to the movie was inspired by Dark Knight Returns, which is not true. But when there's two things in this movie in particular of like the way it opens with the news talking heads, and the scene where there's a hostage situation and RoboCop like busts through the wall and takes the guy out. Both of those things, a lot of people say is the movie like being inspired by Dark Knight Returns, but the script for this movie had been floating around since like 1981, 82, because one of the co-writers actually got the idea for it when he saw Blade Runner. So he was like working in Hollywood and he saw Blade Runner filming, and he got the idea of RoboCop from the replicants, because his problem with Blade Runner was the fact that the replicants were too human. He disagreed with. He thought it should have been more in the other direction of the more robotic they become, the less human they are, which is how he got RoboCop. It floats around, and then the other co-writer comes in who has an idea for a social satire, and they kind of marry it together and they make RoboCop. Paul Verhoeven comes into the picture because this is his first English language movie, and the dude does not understand English slang or the dialect well at all. There are stories about like, I don't understand why all the black people call each other brother when they're not related. Like, he's that guy. He's that white guy. So there's very, very little chance that Paul Verhoeven was reading Frank Miller comics when he made RoboCop. But after RoboCop comes out, they want to make a sequel. And when the two writers come in, they write a sequel called RoboCop: The Corporate Wars. And RoboCop, both the first one and the Corporate Wars, are actually heavily influenced not by Frank Miller, but by 2000 AD and Judge Dredd, which is where Corporate Wars as a premise comes out, because the Corporate Wars are essentially a distant future in the RoboCop world where everything turns into megacities. The studio gets that script. They're like, no, fuck you. This is terrible. This is way too political. Rewrite it. Except as soon as they say that, there's a writer's strike. And so they can't rewrite it. And so to get around the writer's strike rules, they hire Frank Miller, who's a comic book writer and not part of the guild, to rewrite the movie. And that's they get RoboCop 2.
Fascinating. Frank Miller's a fucking scab, man.
Yeah, and the thing is, they don't even use his script afterwards, because that movie gets another rewrite, and then Frank Miller turns his script into a comic book later.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. No, but it just like it's so weird because I knew Frank Miller was tied to the franchise, and you just see the talking heads and stuff right out the gate, and I'm like, yeah, man, that's the most Miller shit ever. And I get to the like end, and it's like written by these two schmucks, and I'm like, the fuck? Um, this is confusing. And it's interesting because like RoboCop 2 is 1990, so you kind of like losing that edge of the 80s and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's a fascinating fucking movie. Yeah, the nuke thing, I'd buy that for $1 is so fucking quotable.
Oh, yeah.
The car, the way, like just how alien and uncomfortable a lot of the future like portrayals of culture and technology are in this is really interesting to me. Like, I don't feel like the virtual home tour thing is that far off from what's actually happening now. You know, because
Well,
you've got like Zillow and stuff where you can just go through and look at people's homes in pictures and whatnot. And you know, you have realtors that will actually take you there and stuff, but I don't feel like we're that far off from marrying those two things. That like you can just show up with your fucking phone and the realtor will be there, like a little pre-recorded message will be there, walking you through the fucking home.
Well, and like even if we aren't there literally with homes, we definitely are there with other stuff like cars, where you can just buy a car entirely online at this point. You know, like that's what fucking Carvana is for, where you just browse online, you look at all the photos, and then you can just buy it and they'll deliver it to your house. I had a friend.
How easy and convenient that is. Sponsored by Carvana.
I had a friend who thought about buying a new car last Monday, and they got it delivered on Friday from Carvana. Like, it's just one of those things where it's so disconnected from human interaction at this point for good and bad reasons, and that kind of the growing dehumanization that's in this movie is really interesting, because you see it like weed its way through a lot of stuff in this, because obviously RoboCop himself is disconnected from who he was as Alex Murphy, and you get that really great scene where he goes through the house and he remembers all the stuff about his wife and his kid and stuff like that. But what's really interesting about it, and what I really like, is like how clear the movie is until the very end that RoboCop is not Murphy. That Murphy did just straight up die, and RoboCop is a different person trying to understand him. So much so that on set, Peter Weller would just be called Robo or RoboCop, and in the script, when Murphy dies, all the dialogue, instead of being listed as Murphy, is listed as RoboCop. Even the bit at the end where the corporate guy asks him, "Who are you?" and RoboCop says Murphy, the script says literally RoboCop says Murphy.
I do love that fucking ending, though.
It's so good.
You know, it's so good to just end on, like, that fucking kick of a line, though. Because there's an argument for some kind of, you know, falling action, de-escalation, exposition section of, like, and this is what happened, and this, and this, and this, and this is how RoboCop saved the town, the end. But it's just, no, we're just gonna go out on Murphy. I
love that Murphy / RoboCop doesn't actually like fix anything by the end, you know? Like he has a vendetta against the one specific guy at the corporation. And after he just fucking executes that dude with his gun, movie's over. Nothing is actually societally fixed or solved. RoboCop just got to have vengeance.
Yeah. The idea of like police striking and, you know, corporate ownership of the police is just fascinating. How awful something like that would be.
He says from the near future with for-profit prisons.
Like, yeah, that was the other thing is I love that there's that line from the old man. I love that that's his name. It's just the old man. Where he's like, now, the current tax system has been great for growing corporations, but something has been lost in the middle for the public works, which is why we're stepping in to take over things like policing. And like, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah.
That's so fucking scary.
I love how on the nose a lot of that stuff is, and even like how predictive some of it is, because you have that argument between the two corporate guys, Dick Jones and like the other conniving guy who wants to make RoboCop, after the Ed 209 like malfunctions, quote unquote. But they get into that argument, and Dick Jones is like, he was getting ready to have this thing shipped out for military contracts, and there was going to be like 10 years of replacement parts, and that the whole idea of planned obsolescence was built into this machine to begin with. And in the 80s, you certainly started seeing that happening with the auto industry, but now it's just the norm, where like all of your technological devices are built in with planned obsolescence. Phones are intentionally designed to break after 2 years. Cars are the same way. So I love, like, even in like the 80s, in the height of like the Reaganomics era, you had a movie where the bad guy is a corporate dude who says that we will sell you something that is designed to break.
Mm-hmm. I like that scene with him and Red Foreman,
Yeah.
where he's talking about like all the opportunities of working with the crime lord for all the opportunities for the new shining corporate city.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're going to own the crime and the police. I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ.
It is. It's so like overt about some of those connections too, because in the beginning of the movie, when Murphy gets essentially massacred by the crime lords, he gets completely ripped apart by their gunfire, and then his body gets completely desecrated by the police. And so he's already on both ends of it, where like the crime lords have killed him, and then the corporations have taken what's left of his humanity. You get that great fucking moment where they're like, we managed to save his left arm, and they're like, no, cut it off. He needs to be fully robotic. And so they replace his arm. And then you have these two factions sort of merging at the end, when you realize like the crime and the corruption or the corporations are both doing the same thing. And your window into that is that they both did the same thing to RoboCop / Murphy. And like that sort of slow realization of like, there's no outing this system. RoboCop gets to have his revenge on the two dudes, but at the end of the day, right, the reason he gets to bypass the fourth directive and kill Dick Jones is not because he stops the corporation or overcomes his programming. It's because the dude gets fired. It's because the company says, we want to disassociate from you, and so RoboCop gets to kill him. But the company is still there. Nothing is fundamentally changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's such a good scene though. Just like, Dick, you're fired.
It's so good.
Thank you. Yeah, I like this movie a lot. This just holds up as an fucking all-timer, honestly.
It's so good. I'm surprised.
It's so fucking quotable. Alright, so that all being said, I do want to talk about some of the negatives with this movie, some of the things that haven't aged as well. And I think the first and foremost, the biggest one to talk about is the effects. Between like this is, I think, the movie I would point to when people say stupid shit like practical effects just look better. And I'm like, you know what this movie holds up to really well is the freeze frame test that people like to do for stupid fucking reasons when they want to talk about how bad and how fake a movie's effects look. Because you freeze frame any of these shots that have special effects, whether that is Peter Weller in some really impressive prosthetic costuming or the Ed 209 just being in the room with everybody, all of that looks really, really good as a still image. But then you see like Peter Weller move, and he's supposed to be Super Cop, and he's just like trotting around like fucking C-3PO. And then you see the Ed 209's choppy ass stop motion effects and the way that it has to like be blue screened in the scenes with people, and it like the lighting doesn't quite match and stuff as it moves around. And it's like, you know, the effects don't hold up super well, and maybe this would be one of those films that like would kind of benefit from having more more modernized effects. That being said, the RoboCop remake with more modernized effects, not very good, but the effects look pretty good.
Yeah, the N209.
He actually looks more like a scary, intimidating and capable super cop in the remake. I'll give him that.
The remake has some moments here and there that are fun. I like that Jackie Earle Haley is in it. I like that Michael Keaton gets to play the crazy corporate guy in that movie. But it's not a good movie. But yeah, no, the Ed 209 probably has the worst of it because like when it's just standing there, it's fine. But when he starts walking around, the animation for it looks really, really bad. The RoboCop costuming though is really interesting. Essentially, when Peter Weller got cast for this movie, he knew his face was going to be covered up for most of it, so he hired an acting coach to kind of help him build up his expressiveness with just his body language and his mouth. And the problem was he got that before the costume was actually ready for him, so he didn't get a chance to practice before he was in costume. And then when he got in costume, it was super uncomfortable. It was hot all the time. It was extremely heavy. They were filming this in like fucking Texas in the summer, so he was just burning up in there. And it got so bad he actually got fired from the movie. But when they tried to replace him, all the costumes and props were already designed and cast to his body, so they couldn't hire someone and replace him without essentially redoing a bunch of pre-production. So they had to keep him on the film. And to kind of power through it, Peter Weller was just like taking sleeping pills and drinking alcohol on set and stuff, and he was a wreck trying to make this movie.
And then he came back and did it 2 more times.
He does it 1 more time. I think he leaves for the 3rd one.
Is he not in RoboCop 3? I thought he was.
I'm pretty sure it's one of them he does not come back for. I think it's the 3rd one.
I mean, if any of them... Oh, whoops, sorry, people. If any of them are movies that he should not have come back for, it's definitely the 3rd one. That movie sucks.
Yeah, he only does the first 2, and then someone else takes over for the 3rd one.
Okay, I didn't know that. Isn't that the one where he shows his face the most? Did they just, like, fucking keep a cast of Peter Weller's face for that fucking movie?
Genuinely, I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them, because you remember how, like, they finished Bruce Lee's Game of Death, and they had shots where they just, like, taped Bruce Lee's face to a window? So I wouldn't put that past them for RoboCop 3, but I haven't seen that movie in at least 10 years.
I mean, that is the right decision. No one should watch RoboCop 3. There's a special 10th Circle of Hell, and in it they just play RoboCop 3 on loop.
What did you think of Peter Weller as RoboCop though? Do you feel like acting wise he does a good job?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's an absolutely fantastic performance, and I do see a lot of the capability and a lot of the thought put into the way that he carries himself and the way that he expresses or doesn't express. People get it's a common insult to throw around of like their acting is so wooden or they seem like a robot, but like genuinely acting without emotion is really fucking hard, because you're a human and it is your default to have emotion and to be expressive. So to have the level of control and the level of stoicism that Peter Weller shows here is very, very impressive to me. And the amount that like is in just those fleeting moments where he's like flashing back and having little memories of being Murphy here and there, you can definitely see like these just instances of humanity coming back out, and it's really fascinating. That being said, my problem isn't with the acting. It's just like the suit looks amazing when he takes the fucking helmet off and you see the face, and like it actually looks like it's like peeled up and like clamped in to the rest of like a mechanical case for his brain or whatever. I'm very, very impressed by the look of it, but my thing is just the movement. The dude can't do anything. He doesn't look like this intimidating, killer super robot or whatever. he just looks like he's clopping around the fucking set. Boom, 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 boom. It looks really silly. In some instances, there's sometimes that it works, and then there's other times where I'm like, God, he just looks so uncomfortable in that.
I think so it definitely like hurts the case for RoboCop being the ultimate robotic warrior when 2 years ago we got the first Terminator movie and we got Arnold. Because both movies are really, really good effects work-wise. Because the stuff they do in that movie to like peel back Arnold Schwarzenegger's skin to see his robotic eye or like his damaged hand and stuff, all that is really, really good work. But when you see that dude, and you see how much of a force of nature he is, and you compare it to RoboCop, you definitely do have a little bit of like, I don't know, man. RoboCop is not as scary as Arnold Schwarzenegger coming at me with a shotgun. That being said, though, I do kind of like the simple and campy nature that level of stilted movement kind of brings to the movie, because the thing about like this movie, about Starship Troopers, about Basic Instinct, about like all of these Paul Verhoeven movies is on the surface they're just ridiculous. They're ridiculous and they're campy. People will even say stuff like Starship Troopers is terrible acting, and part of that is on purpose, where I think the fact that it looks ridiculous and campy and not intimidating is kind of to disarm the audience to not take it seriously. So when you get those kinds of like holy shit truth bombs, or like that really dark social commentary, it just kind of hits more because you're not expecting it. I do really like when you get like RoboCop first shows up and he has like his like triumphant walk around of capturing criminals and stuff. He has this one where this woman's about to be assaulted by these two guys, and then RoboCop shows up and then saves her, and then she like comes to hug the dude and being like, "Oh, thank you for saving my life," and then he just like really wooden, really robotically says, "You have suffered a trauma. I'm going to call a rape process hotline," and then just leaves. And like that moment there where it feels like you almost should have gotten some degree of humanity there, or you should have gotten some comfort. But instead you get like this ridiculous dude showing up to disarm the situation and then completely disengage from any of the emotion that would have been there, and that woman's got that shocked expression on her face. I think that really hits because RoboCop feels so goofy, because the idea that...
But hear me out on this, Steve, okay? But he shot the rapist in the dick.
Yeah, I know, it was awesome. It's awesome. It's both awesome and like weirdly uncomfortable at the same time. I love it.
Yep. It's fucking the top tier shit. Like, I'm gonna shoot a rapist in the dick. You see why I feel like this had to have been written by Frank Miller, though, right?
Oh no, I get you. I mean, the sensibilities definitely like really, really line up, especially like when you factor in all the stuff Miller does in Dark Knight Returns. It feels like it could just straight up be a RoboCop movie, which is essentially what his RoboCop 2 script was.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted. You were in the middle of saying something about that.
I was just saying that, like, I think the goofiness is kind of the part of the charm. I like that the sort of window into Murphy's humanity that his partner has is when he does the gun twirl. And the gun twirl is the thing that his son watches the cop do on TV. It's kind of convoluted in a sense, but it is really interesting that like Murphy's little hint of humanity isn't even necessarily something that he likes to do or something natural to him. It's something that he forces himself to do, an act he puts on because his son likes it. So you're always like several degrees removed from humanity, no matter how deep you go into this guy's psyche. And I really like that. I really like that, like, you have all of this goofiness, and then the more you start probing the goofiness, the movie just starts inviting you to ask these weird questions of like, isn't this fucked up? Isn't this fucked up? Isn't this fucked up? And I feel like it would just hit less if RoboCop was sort of a more serious presentation like Terminator.
Maybe, I don't know. I think that like you still get the campiness just from the environment of everything. I would definitely agree that if you go too serious with not only RoboCop but with other stuff in the movie, it all starts to fall apart. because that's the thing that the 2014 film falls victim to, is it doesn't have the same level of like over the topness, and so when it attempts to do it, it comes off as like really insincere, or like it just doesn't really understand what it's trying to be. It feels very like MCU, like obligatory maybe. But at the same time, I don't think you necessarily need your main character to feel laughable. And it's not like I hold this against the movie, and I think it makes it like bad. I think it's just the reality of where they were at the time. They weren't exactly capable of making and shooting this and having it look as good as I think they wanted it to.
Sure.
I think it's just limitations of the technology at the time. And I just, again, wanted to kind of get into that a little bit from the perspective of when we talk about digital versus practical effects, people have such this, like, glossy, rosy picture of, oh, when they did practical effects, everything looked better. And I'm like, no, it didn't, because this was, like, top tier for the time. Not the tippy top tier, because, like you said, Arnold looked a lot better. But this is still, like, really good high-level integration. This was a, blockbuster film. It's just, it doesn't hold up very well. It just doesn't look very good nowadays. And also, the limitations of what they're able to do with the technology, I'm not 100% confident, but certainly feel like they have some bearing on the story. I don't think the Ed 209 was meant to lose by not being able to go down some fucking stairs. I think like that whole sequence is such
good,
is such a weird dorky thing, and you end up with like having to have the cops try to kill him kind of out of nowhere, and in a way that I don't think really makes sense. Because then later, like, the cops don't bat a second eye at him when he shows up, and everyone still treats him like a cop for the rest of the movie anyway. But, like, the cops go out of their way to try to kill him because the movie just needs him to be more beaten down by that point. And it just feels like the Ed 209, the effects were not capable of giving the movie the fight that it seemed like maybe the earlier drafts had intended.
RoboCop being beaten down, I think, is a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I mean, with the N209, I think that climax feels particularly bad. And I think that there's sort of this buildup of RoboCop versus the N209 that I think was supposed to be a little bit more epic than that. And when you followed that sequence up after RoboCop just eviscerates all of the gangsters, it just feels really anticlimactic. It feels like that bit is sandwiched between two much better sequences of drama and action, between him taking out the gangsters and him going up the stairs and killing the one executive who gets fired. So like it's interesting because N209's like an iconic design now. Firepower in the Iron Man comics is based off of it too, but it never actually does anything outside of its introduction scene to warrant much of that, and it's a little disappointing because you kind of hope for it to be more than just sort of a placeholder effect. The scene where the Ed 209 quote unquote malfunctions at the beginning is interesting because the idea of whether it malfunctions or not is a little bit different between the movie and the script, because in the movie the robot's not able to detect that the dude dropped the gun, and so it malfunctions and kills him. In the script, it was actually supposed to be that the gun drops on the carpet and he just can't hear the gun because it lands on a really soft carpet. So he doesn't malfunction. He's just limited in what he's capable of doing. And so, like, it's different commentary on both ends, but I think it works better in the movie that he just is a stupid machine. The RoboCop being beat up, though, that part's really interesting because there is this whole layer of religious metaphor and resurrection when it comes to RoboCop that's fascinating. People have written about this, like fucking Zizek has a whole essay about this, but Verhoeven and the writers of the movie are actually very overt about this too, because in the scene where he's got his faceplate off and he's running by to gun down Kurtwood Smith's character, he was walking over.
Who's Kurtwood Smith? You mean Red Foreman?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
When he's going to gun down Red Foreman in the big like Power Rangers empty quarry, he he walks over a puddle, and the way that was shot, Verhoeven was very intentional about the idea that he wanted to show RoboCop like he was walking on water, because the idea was that Murphy dies in the opening of the movie. Murphy is gone. Murphy is not in this movie. RoboCop is born, he dies, and then he's resurrected. And he wanted to examine this idea of, like, what does it really tell us, sort of symbolically, if you take RoboCop as kind of an American Jesus? Like, if the symbol of America and Jesus was a robot cop who had all of his humanity stripped away, what would that say, or what would that look like? And that was kind of the idea behind beating RoboCop down and then bringing him back out and him having the faceplate gone, because it was supposed to be a moment of after he died, he came back as something else, and whether or not that's good for humanity is kind of left up for debate. But the idea of RoboCop is like a Jesus figure, of the idea that, like, he's the epitome of the decadence of the civilization, that RoboCop and Alex Murphy die for the sins of corporate greed and don't even get to stay dead because he is bound forever in this weird flesh mechanical hybrid. And he has like this both heroic ending where he kills the bad guy, but this undercurrent of dread because he doesn't actually solve any of the social problems, I think is actually a really fascinating dimension to the movie. And I know I'm not reading into it too much because I know other people have written about this, and I know the director has talked about this.
I mean, no, I definitely see what you're talking about there. I don't necessarily have a problem with any of that. Just when I'm talking about RoboCop being beat down, I don't really dig the fact that the police just turn on him, because the movie doesn't really make a good case for why that happens. Like, he goes after the corporate guy, but he seems to be kind of on a high, because he turns in Kurtwood Smith, and then he starts going after Rick Jones. What was his name? Dick Jones?
Dick Jones, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Dick Jones. He starts going after him, and then he, tries to arrest him, and the directive comes in, and then he fights the Ed 209. And then he's just, like, downstairs, and just, like, all the fucking cops are there, and they've, like, got orders to kill him. Like, from who? From Richard? From Dick? Like, what? When? And then, like, immediately after all the carnage with Kurtwood Smith to, like, get the revenge on him, you get he just walks into the boardroom, and the old man goes, "What is it, officer?" Like, he still just treats him like a cop, and it's just like, it's just this weird, like, incongruity of, I don't know what it is. I think I have a really good sense of, I can see when movies are stitching together different drafts of a thing, and so I can kind of just feel that out. It always kind of stands out and feels a little awkward to me. And I think that's just what it is it just feels a little awkward right there to me.
I think a problem with that, and what you're saying in sort of the larger implication, is I think a lot of the cop characters in the movie are underwritten, and the cop commentary outside of RoboCop himself and the corporate angle is kind of limited. His partner is a fine enough character, but I feel like she doesn't really, like, serve the story very much. Even as, like, his window back to his humanity, I feel like Murphy figures out most of that on his own. He doesn't really need her. And so, like, when the cop characters aren't really important to the plot and they just kind of exist as devices to either be on RoboCop's side or not on his side, it makes that angle of it hurt a little bit more. I like these bits here and there of the police being resistant to the idea of corporations taking over the police department. But I also really like this idea that's left open without much conversation of the city got bad regardless of the corporate influence on the cops. That the cops weren't doing any good to begin with, and now they're just mad at the corporations, but they weren't really doing a better job without them. It's just now things are getting worse in a different way. And I wish there was more from the cop side of it to kind of examine that. But as it stands, there's really not, outside of like that one police chief guy who has a couple of scenes where he like rallies the cops to RoboCop's side at the end, and that's about it.
Yeah. The cop stuff in this is not my favorite. I don't hate it, but it's just not very interesting. Because it feels like it's walking the line of wanting to really do a send-up of cops, but it knows that that's like just that bridge too far for American audiences, so it doesn't want to fully commit to it, and so you end up getting like good hero cops kind of thing still. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd need more time to really think on that side of it. I don't think you could make a RoboCop movie today. I'll tell you that. I don't think the public is like prepped for the idea of the heroic, super fucking brutal, violent cop anymore. Dirty Harry probably wouldn't take off the same way with the current generation.
I don't even really know like who you would get to do a RoboCop today that has like the same line between serious and satire that could like really nail it. Forgetting even the fact that audience
Christopher Nolan.
Definitely not Christopher Nolan. I could maybe see someone like Jordan Peele doing it.
Yeah.
I think you could like get the tone of like Get Out or Nope or something, and you throw it into RoboCop, and you have that extra dimension of black people's relationship to the police that isn't in this movie. That could be kind of...
What if RoboCop was black?
There you go. That's a Jordan Peele idea. That's a Key and Peele sketch right there. Yeah, it feels like it wants to say more, and I think when Verhoeven does Starship Troopers afterwards, and he does kind of go more for full tilt into the criticisms of the military-industrial complex, he's able to be more overt about it, because I think people in the abstract are more okay with being critical of the military than they are of the police, even if what you're saying is similar. And Starship Troopers has, a lot like RoboCop, has two very different audiences. It's got the people that watch the movie and think this is the greatest dumb action movie of all time because it's just soldiers fighting aliens. And then it's got the other audience that's like, this is just one big lampoon at war and the military-industrial complex. And the book is like a sort of like hyper right-wing valorization of that soldiers versus aliens thing, and Verhoeven like detests the book, which is why the movie is making fun of all of that. And I think he's able to get away with it more because you're not talking about real people, you're not talking about real soldiers necessarily, and because I think the military foreign war outside your neighborhood thing is easier to digest. It's much simpler to say like, I don't think there should be troops in Iraq, than it is to say, no, I don't want cops roaming around my street.
Yeah, it's an interesting commentary, and I don't really know if anyone has the balls to try to do it with a heroic RoboCop, because you can't do a RoboCop movie and not make him the protagonist, right? Like, you can't have the bad RoboCop, because it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't be the same kind of thing. It wouldn't hit the right tone. So I don't know. It's a fascinating idea, though.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like with this movie in particular, how far it's able to go. And I think because it coaxes so much of that in like weird jokes and campiness, it's maybe able to get away with a lot more of that stuff. The bit that I thought was really interesting in the script versus the movie is that the movie's opening scene was supposed to be different, where in the script, in the movie they're all talking about like that other officer that's in the hospital after being attacked by the gang, and then like when Murphy gets to the station, they like ceremoniously take his name tag off the locker, letting all the cops know that that dude died. You're actually supposed to see that guy get brutalized in the beginning of the movie, but instead of that, they just open straight with the newscasters, which I think is probably smarter because I think the newscasters set up the tone a lot better because you just immediately get this sense of like this world is just slightly into our future and way more fucked up. But there's always this grain of reality still without you having to like be set up for like a Terminator style prequel that makes you think the movie is going to be serious.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Though, I don't know. Just the way the fucking dude, the way that Kurtwood Smith is just so evil and they just fuck up Murphy.
Oh yeah.
I kind of want to see that a second time.
The scene where they fuck up Murphy is pretty rough. Where he's like making the sound with the gun before he blows off his arm. Like, oh, that's rough.
It's a lot to watch, and I'm like, oh, fucking god damn, that is so brutal, but just holy shit. Just the way that, like, they pump his ass full of lead, but he's still, like, walking around. You know? Like, it's just so fucked up. That's, like, nothing else in Hollywood does that. You know? That's just not something that is handled on a regular basis.
Yeah, and they're really not afraid to just kind of linger on how brutal that scene is, because in that particular moment, the score is just completely gone. When he gets his hand blown off for the first time, he gets to like go like a full 30 seconds or so, just kind of like agonizing in pain and trying to run, before they start blowing him up even more. And then when they do that, you get his partner just having her reaction shots of watching it. So it's like that scene just keeps escalating and getting emotionally worse and worse and worse, even if you're not seeing as much blood as you did the first time. That's maybe the darkest the whole movie goes, with the exception of that one bit at the end where that toxic waste falls on that one dude and he mutates.
I fucking love the creep design that they do for that.
He just looks like fucking Toxic Avenger. I love it.
See, it's weird for me. I wrote a like a Nolan verse fan fiction at one point, and my take for Clayface was to do the like diseased version that Morrison did in Arkham Asylum. And so, like, that was my take of what I imagined this Clayface would look like. As I was just searching, like, I was Google imaging just different things, and I found that image, and I was like, that is him. That, like, his skin is just falling off, and he's, like, just horrific pain. Oh, my God.
It's pretty horrifying, and I kind of love how much like fucked up imagery this movie gets away with, in between bits of campiness and violence. For like your first English language feature, I feel like he kind of nails exactly the audience and the tone he's going.
No, I would definitely agree. It's a very impressive picture. I'm so surprised, because I did not know this until I started talking to you about it. I'm so surprised by things in this movie. Like, I did not realize this was his first English film. I didn't realize that he, didn't even speak English before he started making this. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, or at least like he didn't understand English very well. He probably like had like enough like understanding to read it, but he had no understanding of like normal American things. All of the social commentary in this film is not from him, because he doesn't understand, or he didn't understand, things like Reaganomics. All of that predates him because.
I mean, that I still don't fucking understand.
Well, yeah, I don't think Reagan did. But all of that stuff predates Verhoeven's involvement because that comes from the two writers. Because the first one, the Blade Runner guy, he's really inspired to do something like RoboCop, and then he partners with another dude who is extremely left wing, and so like these two kind of combine to take the left wing ideas and science fiction ideas to make a script that is very like sort of cutting edge for the time of talking about Reaganomics and corporations and deregulation and stuff like that. And a lot of that, as far as I know, like went over Verhoeven's head because he didn't understand American culture. As it goes on, though, his career gets a little bit more precise as far as like the things he's critiquing. But like the sort of like quintessential Americanness of RoboCop is basically absent from a lot of his other movies because he's kind of going for like that sort of more universal late 20th century, late capitalist decline sort of vibe.
Interesting. I don't know. I'm not sure I have much else to say on this movie. It's good. I like it. It's a good movie.
Yeah, it's a really, really good time. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite Verhoeven movie, but it's definitely up there.
Do you have, like, what else would be up there? Is it just, like, Starship Troopers?
He did RoboCop, he did Total Recall, Basic Instinct, Showgirls, Starship Troopers, Hollow Man, if you remember that movie from, like, the early 2000s.
I like Hollow Man.
Yeah, Hollow Man's good. There's a few others in between that I'm kind of blanking on. If I had to pick a favorite from him, it'd probably be between RoboCop and Basic Instinct, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Just interesting. Just curious.
Want to go ahead and do ratings?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're about done. All right. I will rate this movie 4 out of 5. Robots falling down the stairs.
I will rate this movie 4 out of 5 secret fourth directives.
I love how that's introduced and how ominous it immediately becomes.
I know, it's so funny. I know you couldn't predict like modern interfaces in the 80s, but I always love when things are futuristic and it's still got like old school DOS style fonts and shit like that.
It's just about the level of imagination that the people have, right? Because like you can't, but occasionally people did, and like we've modeled society toward those things, like fucking Star Trek and like, you know, tablets and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then also in Star Trek, they'd have like actual computer tapes and stuff too.
Yeah, no one thought you were able to summarize all fucking cloud.
Right. Okay. Anyway, I think that'll do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I am RoboCop.
And I'm Murphy. And we're your
next week?
I don't know, we'll figure something out.
Right.
And we're your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.
Woo!